I've always had a complicated relationship with my imagination. Growing up, it was more than just a daydream here and there. My imagination wrapped around me, taking on a life of its own. I would lose hours, lost in beautiful dreams that felt almost tangible. But as I learned early on, this vibrant imagination came at a cost. The nightmares and visions began when I was around 5. They were horrifying, apparitions that seemed to stop my dreams and linger at the edges of my waking life. At night, I would see figures standing in doorways, silently watching. I was raised in a religious family, where angels were meant to be protectors, yet these angels seemed anything but comforting. They had no faces, only smooth, featureless flesh. Their touch was as cold as ice, sending chills down my spine. I remember feeling as though they weren't here to help, but to show me something I wasn't ready to see. The most chilling part, they weren't always visions. As I got older, the apparitions only became more tangible. By the time I was around 8, I started noticing shadowy figures even when I was awake. Blending into the darkness of my room at night, I'd wake up from a nightmare, call out for my parents, and see what I thought was my mother's or father's figure standing in the doorway, just staring. One night, my room was nearly pitch black except for the faint moonlight streaming in through the window. I saw a head peeking around the doorway, watching me, silent and unmoving. I called out, "Mom, Dad?" There was no response, just silence and the faint outline of a head, featureless, taller than my parents ever were. The feeling that something unnatural was lurking in the shadows never left me, and from that night on, I learned to live with that anxiety. As I continued to grow, the encounters took on new forms and settings. I remember one chilling incident in 4th grade vividly. I had just used the restroom at school and was washing my hands when I saw, in the mirror, a head peeking over the stall door behind me. The person's hair was normal enough, but where eyes or a mouth should have been, there was nothing, just smooth skin. I froze, horrified, but the head didn't move or blink. I turned around slowly, hoping that I'd imagined it, but there it was, a motionless, faceless figure. After a long moment, its head began to retreat out of sight. I looked down and saw a pair of brown business shoes under the stall door. In a flash of courage, I ran. Just as I stumbled out of the bathroom, I heard the unmistakable creak of the stall door opening behind me. This was the beginning of what felt like a personal descent into madness. Soon, the watchers appeared more often. A week after the bathroom encounter, I was sitting in my classroom when I heard the familiar clacking of shoes. I turned to see the tall figure standing at the doorway, just outside the classroom. This time, it wore a charcoal grey suit. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, black skin. Its hand, twisted and swollen, gripped the doorway. My classmates didn't seem to see it, even as I sat paralyzed, staring in horror. The teacher asked if I was okay, and just as I looked back to the figure, it made an exaggerated sidestep out of view, its movement disturbingly fluid and unnatural. After that day, I saw psychiatrists and was even prescribed medication, though it did little to curb the visions. Over time, I grew accustomed to their presence, learning to manage the fear as best as I could, though it was far from perfect. Then, in 7th grade, I encountered something far more terrifying than any watcher I'd ever seen. I was outside playing soccer when I noticed a flash of bright red out of the corner of my eye. Turning, I saw her, an impossibly tall woman in a crimson dress, standing across the street. Her presence was overwhelming. I tried looking away, practicing the calming exercises I'd learned, but when I dared to glance back, she was slowly moving toward me, her steps unnaturally elongated, almost as if her legs were dislocating with every stride. I began to panic, and just as I turned to run, she started sprinting. It was an unnatural, contorted run that felt more like floating, her limbs twisting at wrong angles. I sprinted toward the school, desperate to escape. But as I burst through the doors, I found myself completely alone. Everyone was gone, the halls empty and silent. I heard the door slam open behind me, and footsteps echoed down the hall, getting closer and closer. A muffled scream echoed through the corridors, inhuman, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the bones of my skull. At that moment, I was paralyzed with dread. I stopped running, accepting whatever fate was to come. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. I had apparently been found on the soccer field, hysterical and bruised. The doctors couldn't explain my injuries and placed me in a psychiatric ward. I spent months there, and strangely enough, the visions stopped after that. Life began to feel normal. Years passed. 10 years later, at my job, I was in the bathroom stall, taking a moment to decompress, when I heard the creak of the bathroom door and the unmistakable clacking of brown business shoes. I froze, a chill running down my spine. Peering under the stall, I saw them again. The same polished brown shoes that had haunted my childhood. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. I had apparently been found on the soccer field, hysterical and bruised. The doctors couldn't explain my injuries and placed me in a psychiatric ward. I spent months there, and strangely enough, the visions stopped after that. Life began to feel normal. Years passed. 10 years later, at my job, I was in the bathroom stall, taking a moment to decompress, when I heard the creak of the bathroom door and the unmistakable clacking of brown business shoes. I froze, a chill running down my spine. Peering under the stall, I saw them again. The same polished brown shoes that had haunted my childhood.